Our next session centres on the notion of boards as social systems, governed as communities driven by the same endeavour, fostering trust and respect and welcoming positive challenge. Surely boards would be significantly more effective if they all subscribed to that outlook, so why then isn't everybody doing it? Here to break it all down is Group Managing Director of Coca Cola Amatil, Alison Watkins.
Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to deliver this keynote speech for the Governance Institute's 2019 National Conference. I've been asked today to share my experience and reflections on board and leadership teams as social systems. So, I'm currently Group Managing Director of Coca Cola Amatil. I sit on its board. And I've sat on the boards of several other ASX-listed companies during my career. In fact, over the past 15 years since I first joined my first listed company board, I think I've worked with around about 50 different non-executive directors, 6 chairmen, 6 CEOs, including myself twice, and not to mention about 8 company secretaries. As well as my listed company involvements, I've been also a director of many unlisted boards. And I had never really thought about these experiences as social systems as such. But when I reflect on each of these organisations, they were quite distinct and they also changed. They were heavily influenced by industry, by leadership, by the style of the chairman and the style of the CEO, the personalities and the motivations of the directors, as well as the company performance at that point in time and the external environment. It's also, I think, instructive to step back and say, well, how would you actually judge the success or otherwise of a particular board and its leadership team, and thereby say that's a good social system or not? Is it about the share price? Is it about not making a bad acquisition? Is it staying out of the line of fire of a regulator? Is it company reputation? Is it individual director reputation? Is it the results from the board performance review? When can you know that your social system has been successful or not? And what's the timing of that judgment as well? Can you judge it this year, or do you really only know in 10 years' time? And while boards and management together are a social system, where do their respective roles begin and end? Can they really function as one social system without compromising the independence of the board or the accountability of management? So, it was a great opportunity for me to reflect on my experience, and I've thought about 5 common themes that I think do characterise a well-functioning board and management team and the social system they create. And those would firstly be that they are absolutely hyper-aligned. Secondly, that there's trust and mutual respect. Thirdly, that they are reflective and able to learn. Fourthly, that they handle stress events well. And finally, that they understand the importance of the organisation's relationship with the broader community. So let me discuss each of those in turn, and then I'll finish up with a point of view about what you can do as company secretaries to aid the functioning of your board and management's social system. Before I leap into that, let me just step back and say a couple of words about, to what end? How do we know whether our social system is performing or not? How do we think about that? And for me, I think the overarching indicators have to be about whether the company is achieving its purpose. At Coca Cola Amatil, we think about our purpose as creating millions of moments of happiness and possibilities for our customers, our consumers, our partners, our people and communities, and doing this in a way that creates long-term value for our shareholders. So ultimately, it is the shareholders who appoint the board and hold us to account. However, we know we can only succeed for the shareholders by working successfully with all relevant stakeholders and in a way that builds our reputation. This is not something you can necessarily judge within a year. And shareholders also, given their own different timeframes for generating returns, won't all agree whether you're doing a good job at a point in time. At Coca Cola Amatil, for example, we know that consumers and customers want to consume less sugar and they want more choice in their beverages. We also know we want our people to feel proud of our products, and less sugar matters to them too. It also matters to our societies as a contributor to solving obesity, and that's something that governments care about. So we work hard to make that happen. And while there are lots of stakeholders who will benefit, it is absolutely entirely consistent with the interests of our shareholders. If we didn't change, our sales would decline, and the case, for example, for regulation, such as a sugar tax, would be stronger. So that's why the first thing matters so much: absolute hyper-alignment between the board and management. What is our purpose? What's our strategy? What are the targets for the company? And what does that mean we're going to get done this year? Agreeing this, thoroughly debating it, reporting on it regularly is vital, not just filing it away and pulling it out at the end of the year. Alignment with a board is not only about outcomes, it's also about routines and processes, making sure there's explicit consideration, no misunderstandings on how the board will operate, and then delivering against this really helps with this hyper-alignment. How much pre-reads? How often do we discuss strategy? How often do we do site visits? What kind of food do you like to eat? How do we make sure the board's behaviours don't unwittingly cut across and actually ideally reinforce what we're trying to achieve? E.g. their own safety behaviours, their attitudes to cost, the growth mindset they display through their questions. The second ingredient for me for a successful social system is trust and mutual respect. This starts with the chairman and the CEO, and they set the tone. As a CEO, I've experienced different styles of chairman, very different styles of chairman, and it's really important to understand what drives your chairman. Do they like to meet regularly? How long? What issues do they want to engage on? How structured or formal do they like to be? Should I create an environment where they're free to meet with members of my team? How do I make sure that doesn't backfire? How would they like you to handle interactions with other NEDs? How do I make sure I over-index on keeping them up to date and syndicating some of the big decisions, for example, about people? How do I make sure they're well prepped when they cross paths with government ministers? How do I make sure they don't read bad news in the newspaper first, or if they do, they then hear quickly from us? How do you make sure you create an environment where management teams and NEDs have a bias to assuming good intent, staying fact-based, engaging in idea conflict rather than social conflict, and avoiding notorious director bad behaviours like generalisations, over-reliance on anecdotes, and what I'd call piling on behaviour in the boardroom. These are all very important and many of them quite practical questions to be addressed in order to establish a foundation of trust between the chairman and the CEO. And then with that foundation in place, it comes down to trust in each other's ability to execute decisions and not to second guess. Being authentic, honest, and forthright on both sides really allows trust to flourish. My third ingredient for a strong social system between board and management is a system that is reflective and able to learn. As executives, we tend to get lots of feedback. We're used to performance reviews and appraisals. We may still brace, but we know they come with the territory and we know we can learn. Boards tread warily, and with good reason. Directors are accountable to shareholders rather than to the chairman per se, and directors can't easily be removed. So, a director who doesn't fit the mould or necessarily play nicely with the rest of the board actually might provide challenge and activism that shareholders would see as a positive. There is no doubt, though, that some kinds of feedback for a board collectively and for directors individually can be absolutely beneficial and really helps. So the director who's unprepared needs to hear that. The director who regularly steps over the line between the board and management needs to have that kind of behaviour called. Directors need to be really conscious of the multiplier effect of their behaviours, their distraction in the boardroom, their throwaway line, their innocuous question. Most directors want to do a good job. They want their reputation to be enhanced. They want to be in good standing. And yes, they want to contribute to the success of the company. New directors want to understand how to calibrate their interventions. Directors often are in multiple settings and they can bring valuable experiences from elsewhere to bear. Directors, like the rest of us, also have blind spots, and so creating a climate where feedback is sought, provided and acted upon really helps the social system get into a continuous improvement, virtuous cycle. And this is partly about formal board review processes, but it's much more about informal routines with a tone set by the chairman. A chairman who not only asks and gives director feedback, but also asks for and gives management feedback. The fourth ingredient I'll point to is how well you handle stress events as a social system. We've seen some pretty high-profile stress events recently with the Royal Commission. But it's not only that kind of event, it's also disasters, perhaps like Samarco for BHP or Dreamworld for Ardent Leisure. It's also uninvited takeover interest, like I've certainly experienced at GrainCorp. It might be when the company's not achieving its forecasts and needs to downgrade earnings, or an acquisition turns into an impairment discussion. It might be a class action. It might be a strike against the REM report. It might be an activist or a CEO scandal. No company's immune. And the real test of the strength of the social system is under this kind of adversity. All of them are different, and I know I've experienced several. And the things that really made a difference were, first of all, the chairman stepping up his or her cadence and being prepared to roll their sleeves up and commit a lot of extra time versus giving the impression that they wanted to continue to delegate it all to management. For the whole board to be marshalled and available at the right tempo, or to have a clear understanding of what authority would be delegated to a subcommittee. Also, the chairman and other directors not trying to appear like the expert, being willing to show they don't have all the answers, rather focusing on making sure that we've got a good process and advice to deal with the situation. And I would say a selflessness exhibited from directors and executives, really lifting and inspiring and strengthening each other by putting the company and its people first rather than themselves, by displaying excessive focus on their own reputations or financial interests. And genuine care and concern for the people involved, asking how they're doing, acknowledging the impact on their personal lives, and just saying thank you. I don't think we prepare our boards and new directors particularly well for stress events, and indeed they're all unique, but it should not be a surprise to us that something is going to happen. I would observe that directors benefit from carrying excess capacity to have the flexibility to accommodate these things, extra capacity in terms of time. And also that if you've got a very international board operating across multiple time zones, it gets really hard very quickly. Simulations such as some boards would do for a takeover situation are really helpful, and perhaps these could be usefully extended to other scenarios, particularly where disclosure requirements need to be considered. I've spoken so far about the relationships within the boardroom and their leadership teams, but another fundamental relationship in today's world for any company is the one it has with society. This is our social contract. Being a socially responsible company is not tangential to business, but fundamental to it. I said earlier that as a board, we can only succeed for shareholders by working successfully with all relevant stakeholders. This is absolutely the case. And I've found the boards I've worked with that are alert to the long-term social impact of their behaviours and are in constant dialogue with their stakeholders and act responsibly have a competitive advantage. Acting responsibly as a company generates trust, loyalty, and goodwill among customers, employees, business partners, community, media, and regulators. Irresponsible behaviour, on the other hand, can result in disapproval, suspicion, criticism, damage to customer loyalty, loss of brand equity, and a tarnished reputation. So for me, as a CEO and as a member of the board, I think it's always important to step back from any of these situations and check that you're comfortable that you're doing the right thing in these situations, and then test yourself as to whether a long-term shareholder would also see that you're doing the right thing. Now, let me move on to company secretaries, and I know we've got quite a number of company secretaries in the room today. What can you contribute to a strong social system for your boards and executive teams? A lot, I think. Your roles are extremely influential. You have a privileged relationship with the chairman and directors, as well as the leadership team. Undoubtedly, we highly value keeping us compliant and well organised. However, there's a massive and, I think, underrated opportunity for you to contribute directly to the success of our social system. It may require different skills and a reappraisal of the way you think about your role and your impact. It may be uncomfortable. But I'd really urge you to challenge yourselves as to how you do think about the way you make a difference as company secretaries. think about the opportunity that you have to see from your vantage points how the company's social systems can be stronger. By observing how well aligned is your board and leadership team. Are the agendas and the reporting supporting regular calibration of that alignment? Are you providing them with the right information or drowning them with too much? How well are your CEO and chairman communicating? Are there misunderstandings or perceptions between directors and management that could be sorted out? Are directors listening and learning? You, in your roles, need to work with all levels and types of stakeholders, and you need to be Switzerland. You need to stay fair and neutral in all of these situations. By being curious and really putting on a director hat when you're working with management on reporting to the board, you're really well placed to identify what the board will want to know and guide management to make sure it's well addressed. You can work closely with your board and your committee chairman to make sure there's a clear understanding on when that throwaway question is really something that's an action or just a comment and reflection. So ultimately, it's the chairman and the CEO who are responsible for the success of our social systems. However, I really urge you to challenge yourselves as to whether you're playing your part to its fullest. Are you making suggestions? Are you bringing in practices from your peers or from the Governance Institute? Are you winning the trust and confidence of your chairman and CEO to be able to influence? Can you reframe yourself as a coach, an advisor to the board and leadership team, as well as a safeguarder? There's never been a greater opportunity. Thank you.
Alison, thank you very much indeed. Would you join me by the fireside for a chat?
Certainly, of course.
So I guess first of all, I'd just like to talk Royal Commission for a bit. What sort of an impact do you think that it's made on governance, and whether that impact has been for better or worse?
Well, I think it's certainly had a massive impact, and obviously very much in the financial sector, but I would say ripple effects, very strong ripple effects, extending into most listed companies, certainly large listed companies. And I think overall there's some positives out of that. I think it's certainly at Coca Cola Amatil. We, as many companies in the room I'm sure have looked at those findings, have challenged ourselves, and we've identified ways that we can strengthen, for example, our own risk management processes. So I do think there's been an impact. I think it's important to keep balance, and I'd say we're fortunate to have a board that has reminded itself that we're not a financial services company, that we are dealing in a different sort of industry, and I mentioned the growth mindset. I think one of the risks can be that it drives us all to be more cautious, more risk averse, to want to sort of dot every I and cross every T, to be extremely cautious in a way that certainly in our industry is not very helpful, because we need to be fast-paced. We're called fast-moving consumer goods for a reason, and there needs to be a growth mindset. We need to be talking ourselves into doing things, not talking ourselves out of doing things. So there's a balance there, but certainly I think it's had a salutary impact in boardrooms.